Again, if you don't know me by now, I don't know what event you've been attending, but I am Scott Swail of the Educational Policy Institute. For a very long time, I've been analyzing trends in higher education. Started doing that really when I worked for the College Board, and I co-produced the trends in student aid and trends in college pricing reports. Did that for several years with my good friend and colleague Larry Gladio. And that was the start of it, because back in 1996 when I started doing that work, 97 to be a little more accurate, now that I think about it, the big story was college costs are rising and financial aid is not keeping up with it. So what's the story today? College costs are rising and financial aid is not keeping up. It's just that the story is way grimmer today. And here's my whole thesis today, and I'm going to walk you through very few slides, but my thesis is we've got education leaders starting at the White House through to the U.S. Department of Education, through to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to Lumina Foundation for Education, and every governor and every mayor and senator and other representative saying that higher education is critical to our nation's future and our global competitiveness. Okay. And I agree to a point. The part where I think we've got an ethical imbalance is that we're saying that to be successful, you have to have some higher education that leads to career, and we're imposing massive debt on people to do it. I think there's something a little reprehensible about saying that you've got to do this to be successful, and although we will help, we're not going to help near as much as we should or can. This comes on the back of institutions of higher education, state higher education commissions. And then I guess I could argue, but I won't due to time, that it comes down to what we do with superintendents of instruction in states as well. It's not just a higher education issue. But this is a critical issue, and I come at it, guess what, critically. Because I think there's some significant issues here for us to discuss. So I'll show you a few things, and we'll just have a dialogue. If you have questions during or comments during, let's have the dialogue. I'd rather it be more of a to and fro. So this was January 3rd, good way to start off the news year. The Chronicle of Higher Education said, a majority of states are now committed to increasing their percentage of college graduates so their citizens will be better able to compete in a global market where most jobs being created will require some post-secondary education. That's what we're hearing. It's not true. Okay? And I don't know anyone else who has said it's not true other than me. So I could be the idiot in the room. It would not be the first time. I'm often the idiot in the room. It's just not true. I'm not saying it's not important, but that statement is not true. Regardless of what Tony Carnevale at Georgetown University, who I think is awesome, okay, all the data being put out there, my data says it's not true. Oh, sorry. So just to talk about what we're doing here, and I hope this came up, that's exactly the way I wanted you to look at it. I'm not going to give you a full history lesson of higher education in the U.S. that started, since we're talking about it, in 1636, Harvard College back then. I'd like to say the second college, which was several decades later, was the College of William and Mary in wonderful Commonwealth of Virginia, where I live. But this is, if you look at the trends here, and I don't think I have a pointer on this, but you can see what it is, up to an estimated in 2019, this incredible massification of higher education. We talk about that a lot. We talk about the California Master Plan. We talk about the GI Bill. You can go back to 1862 and the Morrill Act. All these things really ramped up higher education to what is arguably held as the best system of higher education in the world. Okay? I believe that to be absolutely true. We are still the best. Okay, we have some of the best institutions. If you believe those rankings, we've got 30 to 35 in the top 100. I don't put a lot of that. Those are all perception issues anyway. But you can measure it on a lot of other ways, research or whatever. We arguably have the best system. Now, we have the largest system by far. We have over 4,000 institutions at 2- and 4-year public-private institutions. We're not even talking about the proprietary institutions, which are massive. And by the way, they're not all bad. There's many, many wonderful proprietary institutions out there. It's just like anything else. There's many that aren't so good. But you know what? We can talk in higher education in the 2-year and 4-year publics or in the 4-year privates. And I can show you many institutions that aren't very good either. Okay? It's just that we don't like to have that conversation either. So if you look at this, through all this, we're going to have almost 25 million students in higher education. This massive bump since the Second World War, and it will continue. And given some of the discussions we've had here, my thoughts on that it's kind of interesting. We're talking more about MOOCs and all these other things. As we redefine higher education, or as it gets redefined by people outside of higher education, which is really what's going on, it could even multiply more as we allow for a freer access to what we call higher education. So those numbers for 2019 from the U.S. Department of Education, Census Bureau, together, that's probably conservative, I think, if we look at this redefinition. So what are the goals of higher education? This is important if we get into the philosophical piece of this. What is our purpose? And that's a conference dialogue for the whole conference. What really are we about? I don't have a good definition myself, so I had to search for one, and this came out of a 2006 history book, really. 1, to train the mind or the soul for enhancement of intellectual satisfaction, or to train the student for a viable occupation and respectable place in the labor market and society. Those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, right? And in many cases, they really are part of what we're trying to get. But without doubt, we've really branded even our traditional 4-year institutions. They're now vocational places. They are vocational. Otherwise, we really couldn't responsibly suggest that we subsidize all these students if they weren't. We want smarter, brighter, more intellectual people. But that alone wouldn't be good enough. It's got to have some type of nexus or connection with the labor force. Now, we do a very poor job of that. But I think it's because we're caught in the middle right now of not knowing how to do it. Because we don't do it the way other nations do. We don't put limits on certain programs. You go to the Netherlands and Germany and these other countries, they limit the number of seats in certain occupational tracks. Because they actually analyze their labor force and they say, well, this is how many dentists we're going to need. So we're only going to let so many people in, knowing that they have some attrition. But once the student gets in that track, they have very little attrition, right? But they do. They do limit it. In pharmaceuticals, medical, whatever it may be, accounting, they'll limit the entrance to it. And that point was made earlier in the event. But we don't do that because we are free and open access, which I think most of us would say that's the better route to go. The challenge with it's really expensive. From a public policy point of view, it's enormously expensive to have a system of second and third and tertiary chances. And it's something that we're going to have to deal with at some point. We're just not dealing with it now. But it is important to try and figure out where we land on this, because this has a lot to do with what is the purpose. And if you think about it down the road, if you want to go to Wellesley College, if you want to go to Notre Dame, I had to say that, Joe. Okay, if you want to go to, some of these fabulous liberal arts, usually very expensive institutions with phenomenal residential experiences. More and more, those are going to shrink and more, they're still going to go to the affluent students one way or another. Even though I know they're working hard with institutional aid, okay, and they work hard, especially some of these other, like Jesuit and other institutions, because it's part of their mission, but it's going to continue to shrink. That residential experience will continue to shrink because it'll be priced so far out of the norm, people aren't going to be able to afford to go. So now we're talking about different models of what it's going to look like for a degree, and we've had some of those conversations. So we have to redefine the purpose of higher education. And it's interesting, I'd love to say that we get a group of people around like this and let's redefine it. Okay, a little naive, but that would be a nice thing to do. But what's going to happen here is no policymaker is going to redefine higher education. No educator's really going to redefine it. Not really. Students are going to redefine it. And businesses are going to redefine it. You know, we've seen for the last 30 years the advent of corporate universities. You know, I think that's only a takeoff point for what corporations are going to start doing in the future, especially with MOOCs and everything else. I think students are now starting to demand different ways of learning. So they're going to push this envelope. And the question is for traditional higher education now, are you going to get run over by that train, or are you going to get on it? And, or at least stay in front of it. Something that my point with Nancy was, higher education's never really been very good at leading the way on these things. You know, there still are the fights in the state capitals. And those of you who may be here from Canada, the provincial governments, to try and get the traditional forms of funding and subsidies. Okay? The game's going to change on them. So let me show you a little data, and this is where I get some of my stuff from. When I read Tony Carnevale's stuff, I guess I would say I disagree with some of it. I agree with most of it, but some of it I don't buy because I'm looking at the same databases. I'm coming with completely different results. But here's some Bureau of Labor Statistics data that says by the last part up there says 2010 to 2020, by the way. I didn't realize it was cut off. But this is the sum of job openings due to growth and replacement needs. And what you can see up there is the red block, as most of the growth is with high school diploma or equivalency or less. Okay? And I'm going to show you some follow-up data here. And on the left side, you see some college. Well, it's less than 1/3 of the new jobs created. And as you're going to see, it's because most of the jobs being created are in areas like food services. Okay? So just think about it. Let's just look at some of these, and then maybe we can have a dialogue. So degree requirements of jobs in 2010. Okay. Now, you might argue how they link up the definition of jobs. And I heard one of our speakers yesterday say, you know, high school educated students aren't getting jobs because those jobs don't exist anymore. That's not altogether true. We've got people with associates and bachelor's degree taking those jobs. That's very true. Okay? I said I'd be a little controversial here, and that's all right. And I'm not always right on these things, trust me. That one I'm right on, okay? Because I see it in my own corporation. When I put out releases for new employees, and I see all these resumes come in, it boggles my mind the level of resumes coming in for entry-level positions. Okay. Now, I've only got one of my employees here, and she's not in the room. So I can talk freely, right? But some of my research staff, I pay well, but when they start, I don't pay them well at all, because I don't have to. Because I'll get 75 resumes at least for every job opening I have. Entry level, I've got people with 2 master's degrees. Okay, because we do get in this perpetual habit of going more and more and more higher education. So it just is a reality that some of this notion that there's no jobs for high school educated people is just in fact wrong, because many of those jobs are taken by people who have a higher education. Okay, it's just a reality. We don't make an equivalence here between skill or competency in our education and what a job requires. Okay? Now, here's what else that I do as an employer, and I think most people do, is it's very easy to say, must have a bachelor's degree, must have a 4-year degree. Why do we do that? Anyone? Because the job needs that level of thinking, critical thinking? Maybe. Or what? It's a simple filter. It's the easiest filter. Okay? And we all do it. We do this stuff based on credentialism rather than actual skill and competency. That's insane if you think about it. Now, in my other research positions, of course, I need them to have a master's or PhD because they need that research skill, and sometimes very specialized research skill. Do they know SAS? Do they know SPSS? You know, those types of things. Sorry, if you don't have advanced degree, you probably do not know those applications. They're that specialized, right? Now, could someone learn those applications without a college degree? Easy. Easy. I could train my 14-year-old to run SAS. Okay, fair enough. I don't know SAS, but I know SPSS. But I could do that. I've got my 14-year-old right now learning HTML programming because I told him, I said, you learn it. I said, I'll employ you and I'll give you minimum wage. To a 14-year-old, minimum wage sounds pretty good. But that's what I do. I'm hoping he gets a skill set as he goes along too. But why not? He'll be the cheapest HTML programmer I can hire. And I do all my HTML programming because I was always pretty good at it. But anyway, I'm going on about this, but this is the reality here. So let's look at a little more, and this is tough to read, I understand, so I'm going to read you what I want you to know. These are jobs with the largest growth. I actually have notes on my iPad, but I'm not going to look at them. Largest number growth in the 10 years from 2010 to projected 2020. Okay? And here's what they are, and what you can see, and I do apologize, I do not have a clicker here. What we see here, these are the names. I did tell you to move up anyway, so really it's your fault. These are the names of the actual employment. And then we have the numbers. We have the number change, but over here is the typical type of training. Now you can see the number one, the largest growth in terms of numbers, retail salespersons. Okay, retail salespersons and 4% are self-employed, but that's 706,000 jobs to be created in retail salespersons. Look at it. Less than high school. Second one, cashiers. All right? Another 250 million jobs. 250,000, sorry. Less than high school. Waiters and waitresses. Less than high school. They even have the average salary on these things. And I'll be glad if you give me a card later. I'll send you a link to actually a blog I wrote in January that all these things reside in. Goes down to RNs. Well, RNs, that is higher education. Okay? But it's an AA. It's a 2-year degree. And that's an interesting thing. And I don't want to get in any fight with nursing people here. But do we really need a BN? Somehow we thought that we should have a 4-year degree to do what our RNs are quite capably doing very professionally now. And now we're talking about 5-year degrees for nursing as well. I'm sure there is validity there, so I apologize, and I think I'm going to hear it now. But it's one of these creep things that we do see in many occupations, so go ahead, hit me. Number 5 on the list is combined food preparation, service workers, including fast food, office clerks, laborers, okay, customer service reps. Okay, I'm looking at this list on here. I don't have one bachelor's degree in the top 10. Not one. I can tell you this, some of those jobs, there's going to be people with bachelor's degrees who are taking those jobs. So let's look at the largest percentage growth, and let's see what we see here. From the number one, this is percentage growth, and this is what a lot of people like to get on the bandwagon and say, well, look at the percentage increase in this jobs. But you have to look at the number growth at the same time. They can be very small pieces, so you have to look at both. We won't analyze that deeply here, but number one is personal care aids. We're a grain society. This is a massive issue for us. Home health aides, biomedical engineers. Okay, that's the first one we've seen with the BA or higher. Okay, helpers, brick masons, stone masons, carpenters, veterinary technologists, which is an associate's degree, iron workers, physiotherapists. So we're going to need, at least in percentage growth, physiotherapists. That's actually typically a very difficult program. So the question is, can we meet the need for that? And then pipe layers, plumbers. So that's pretty blue collar. So you've seen the largest growth in terms of numbers, and you've seen the fastest growth in terms of percentages. What does that mean for higher education? Because if I go back to that first slide about what the politicians and others, the huge stakeholders pushing it, I don't see the connection. Now, I try and guard this because I'm not saying we shouldn't increase access and success in this nation, but to do so, we have to be thoughtful about why we're doing it. And I don't think we are at all. So here's a couple of things that I literally stumbled upon. As you'll see, they don't really go with the total flow, but read this for a minute. An analysis of BLS data by higher ed jobs, and that's the data I just showed as BLS, found that the number of actual jobs in higher education grew 1.8% during the first quarter of 2012, compared to 1% of all jobs. My only point was this: it just struck me funny. Because it struck me and said, who's pushing the higher education agenda? Okay, we're pushing more jobs in higher education. We're pushing more higher education as well. But we're seeing, if you look at where the job growth is going to be, it doesn't make sense. So maybe we're just fulfilling our own future here. The second piece, this is by a Moody's report in January, that the U.S. higher education sector has hit a critical juncture in the evolution of its business model. Even market-leading universities with diversified revenue streams are facing diminished prospects for revenue growth. Stunning to me that Moody's is saying, hey, higher education's in trouble. We've heard it at this event, that higher education from a revenue and a cost benefit in terms of in the institution is in trouble. It's unsustainable the way it is. And you can't look at our systems and see sustainability written all over them. They're just too expensive. So the question is, what's going to happen? So what now? I was very mindful that we could only get so deep on this issue, but I wanted to put some of my thoughts out there. So is it higher education evolution or revolution? That was just kind of a fun play with words there and semantics. But probably evolution. I don't think we'll ever have any type of revolt to change things. But as I said, I think this mostly gets pushed by students. And not just because these famous people have not had higher education degrees, but I think rather because I think students, this idea of badges and these quick certifications, well, you know, step back from our higher education world and think about it. Sure makes a lot of sense. Because I'd rather have a badge that this person can do HTML programming, SAS coding, that they're competent to do things that I need to know people can do really well. Often, those people will have a bachelor's degree or something to go with it. But why couldn't a bachelor's degree also have incorporated into it these competency badges to say, not only did they get a BA at the University of Virginia, but here are their 6 primary competencies that they've passed at least a 90% or 100% level. Okay? Does anyone really disagree with that? I think some do. To me, it's so plain that that's somehow where we have to go. You know, we have to push this whole thing more competency-based. What's the challenge for it? What do you do for a liberal arts education? Where does that fall into it? And I talked to some people about English and history majors. You know what? That can be competency-based easily too. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I was learning to be a teacher, we were really on the forefront of trying to create these individualized learning models, or modules, I should say, that students could just go through it, and if they did these 10 things and they did their self-test, once they were through, they were done with it and they go on to the next set of competencies. And by the way, what was the most beautiful part of that? You could test out of it. You do a pre-test on it, and if you test out of it, or you did 7 of the 10 requirements on it, why redo all your work on the 7 you can already pass? Do the 3. We need to move that model all through elementary and secondary and get away from this age-based stuff. What's the linkage and the nexus of higher education in the workforce? You heard me talk about that, and it really is mind-numbing to me that we aren't thinking about those things. We have to have better conversations about this. I think there has to be more of a linkage. I think it's up to universities and colleges to show what the connections are. And I thought it was really interesting what Nancy showed in her slides at the end. I'm starting to hear from some people of the responsibility of institutions for job placement. Yeah, I always found it funny, and you're a former principal, that principals of high schools especially, once their students are gone, that's it. How do you run an effective business if you don't know what happened to your clients? They're not clients, they're students. They're clients, all right? Okay. How do you do that without really knowing what happened to them? So I think at the high school level, you could back it up too. Said, you should know where your students are going and what they're doing. There should be some tab on there that you're following up. Maybe not all on an individual level that you know what Ricky exactly is doing, but that you know what's happening, certainly in your cohort, and there's some strength there. Well, same thing for higher education. If I'm going to certify through a diploma at the end of 4 or 5 years or 6 years that this person, has earned this diploma from us, I think I have a responsibility to help them gain access successful to the workforce. I think that's part of the responsibility. I'd like to ask Nancy that, actually, and I don't think she's in here now, but I think that's part of it. We have to get there. There has to be more of this connection. I think we have to redefine, or at least clarify, our philosophy of what higher education is. I don't know what it is. I've got thoughts in it, I think we all do, but what is the purpose of it? And is it bifurcated? Is it vocational and it's a mind-expanding experience? Not maybe in the Dennis Leary type, but it is for the public good on this. And then the final point I put on here is removing barriers to higher education if we really mean it. So if we're going to have the President of the United States come out in the State of the Union address and say, we have to hit 60 or 70%, and by the way, again, both parties keep on saying the same thing. This is really non-political at the highest level, that we need this 60 or 70% with some post-secondary education. All right, stop the scare tactics and make it affordable for people to do that. Because it's just unethical to drive by fear, and we drive families by fear all the time to say more, more, and more. Why do you think we have these helicopter parents and things like that? Why do you think so many, especially affluent families, that they're willing to spend $20,000, $30,000 a year to send their kids, and they absolutely do, to private schools, or pay thousands of dollars to take ACT and SAT coaching? Why? Because you're driven by fear that you have to do everything to give your child an advantage. Because for those of you who are parents in the room, and I think that's probably most of us, when it comes down to it, and someone's kind of got a gun to your head saying that your child will be a failure if they don't go to college, and especially for those of us who are college educated, we're going to do everything we can to gain them advantage, even when our kids don't like it. Maybe especially when they don't like it. So we've got this whole fear thing going on. Fear what's going to happen to our kids, because we're hearing the other message as well. And the other message is that this is the first generation in American history that will do lesser than their parents. They will earn less, they will possibly accomplish less, no guarantee on that one, but certainly financially they will do less than we did. Now it'll be interesting to find out if that gets dumped on its head and it's not true, but everything so far would suggest that that is absolutely going to be proven true. And it comes down to what's happening with people with higher degrees taking lower level jobs and being underemployed. So those are kind of my points today.